Welcome to the Dr. Mudgil podcast. This, for me, is a really special one. I'm blessed to have Oteil Burbridge here, and he's just, an amazing musician, of course, everyone knows that, but also an amazing human who just exudes a real positive vibe, and I'm so excited to hear your story, Oteil, and for you to share your journey with my audience, man. So, thank you so much for spending your morning with me, man.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. So I guess, really like we were describing, like I was telling you before we started recording, this podcast for me is all about sharing amazing journeys. And, yours is as amazing as anyone that I know. And, a lot of what I want to talk about is how much work was put in before all these great things that you've done in your life were achieved. And a lot of people don't see that. They see Oteil now, and wow, this guy's playing with every musician. Like, he's playing with Dead and Company. He's played with everybody. Everyone's calling you and saying, "Hey, Oteil, can you sit in on this session? Can you play with me here? Can you play with me there?" But there's probably 20 years of just pure grind behind all of that before, like, you were a hugely sought after bass player. Probably, I would say, the most sought after bass player these days.
Well, I don't know if I'm the most sought after. but...
Well, let's say one of the most. So, the journey really for me starts back at the beginning, man. I know you were born in the Bronx, but you really grew up in the D.C. area. And, go ahead, Ben, sorry.
No, actually, I was born in D.C. My older brother, Kofi, was born in New York, and my parents are from the Bronx. And then right after he was born, they moved to Washington, D.C., and then all the rest of the kids were born there. So that is kind of my start. Southeast Washington, Anacostia, Washington was in the old days, and when I say old days, I mean before I got there in 1964. It was a pretty nice white neighborhood that everybody left, and it became a black neighborhood and poor, and there was a few like really old white people that stayed, like the Wildensteiners, who were our neighbors, and they were three sweet old ladies, and nobody messed with them either. I guess they'd just been there for so long, and but it changed, and by the time I left, remember being on the porch with my mom. I think I'd come home, I was 20 or 21, come home from Virginia Beach, where I had like a beach gig, and I heard this automatic gunfire. I heard brr, brr, and I was like, sometimes you hear stuff you wonder, is it firecrackers or whatever, but firecrackers don't sound like that. I was like, is that what it sounds like, Mom? And she was like, yeah. I was like, are you kidding me? And then she said they started bringing MASH units to DC General Hospital to train them there. And I was just like, whoa. And they moved soon after that. And everybody's now in Charlotte, North Carolina, where my youngest sister went first. They kind of followed her and her kids down there. So DC was pretty rough when I was coming up there. And, my parents were throwing everything at us just to keep us off the streets. So we were doing plays and dance and music and visual arts and everything, sports and just everything. They threw everything at the wall, and I do that with my kids now. And all the art stuff really kind of took. My youngest sister ended up in criminal justice. She went to John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York City. But everybody was good at music, and that kind of in different arts. And, I wanted to be like my older brother, Kofi, who they discovered he had perfect pitch when he was 7. So I was just trying to keep up with him. And I think I got really good because I thought he was normal. He was the only thing I had to measure against. And he was really, really exceptional. He passed away recently, but it really helped me because that's what I was always just trying to play catch up to him. So he was one of my biggest musical teachers, and I had music teachers since I was 5 years old on drums. We all play piano, we all play violin, the old Suzuki method violin, and then I played bass clarinet and a couple other things. I got really into dance, and that's what I wanted to do for a career. And then I got Osgood Slatters and couldn't do that, and got really depressed and picked up Kofi's bass guitar. That's how it's
So were
just.
your parents like very musical? Like I know there's a lot of music in your household. I know your dad was a huge jazz fan from what I've read, but did they play music, both of them?
My dad played flute, but not nearly. It's like my brother could not play him by the time he was 8, and
Wow.
he worshipped musicians, really. Like jazz and music was his religion, and but he didn't feel like he was good enough to do it. Like he didn't have confidence to take the chance on his career, and he really wanted a family, so he chose family over it. So when they discovered Kofi had perfect pitch, he was like, "Oh, are you kidding me?" So, but he was the only one that they let like go off to music school. You know, so I was just like, I always wanted to play in his band, and that was my whole dream. Like
Right.
a career in music, I wasn't even thinking about any of that. I just wanted Kofi to ask me to play in his band, and because I never knew anyone personally that was like a really successful musician. Like, they felt they were taking a really big chance on Kofi, and because they didn't, it was just we didn't know like my friends are really successful. I know a lot of successful musicians. Nigel will grow up knowing tons of really successful musicians. Like there's no fear in that. I don't even know if he wants to do it or not, but like it will be something that he always sees. We didn't have that, so it was
Right.
a big risk for them. But
You're talking about your brother. I'm so sorry for your loss, man. I know you guys were really really tight. I just from things that I've read with about Kofi is he was obviously he played multiple instruments and was amazing at all of them. But a lot of people would say, and this was sort of a universal theme, was Kofi was always the best person in the band, like the most talented musician in the band. And I get that, like having an older brother who was so talented. And I read in another interview that your whole motivation was to get asked to play in his band,
yeah,
and you had been practicing so much. I mean, at such a young age that you started playing with your peers, and you were like, wait a second, how come these guys aren't as good?
oh,
Like,
in high school, yeah.
like
When a couple of guys asked me to play with them, and they're good musicians, but like Kofi was just he was playing with like sitting in with heavyweight jazz cats like Ron Carter and Donald Byrd when he was 12, like so he was just so far advanced, and I was like, wow, man, these guys they're like nowhere near Kofi's level, so it was kind of a not a rude awakening, but just a realization like, okay, there's wow,
tears.
Kofi, like wow. So then it made me latch onto him even more. I was like, well, stick with that dude because you're gonna be like way ahead of the game. And
So
I
where did
he
your
was just so sweet about it. Like I could never deal with like the really mean teachers. I have to be careful because we cuss on my podcast so much. So I
so mine too? It's totally fine.
okay, I just my mom gives me a hard time. But I couldn't. I one of the reasons I never went to New York is I just didn't want to deal like with mean old like asshole teachers because I always had such a sweet teacher in Kofi,
Yeah.
and he showed me so much and never made me feel like less than or stupid or anything. Like there was no stupid questions with Kofi, and I love that. And having a mentor that close to you. I mean, he's only 3 years my elder, but he's still, I feel like, probably 10 or 20 years ahead of me in musically, if not more. I never did catch up to him, but he was really sweet, and I think that was a good fortune for me to have a mentor because I've a lot of the hustle stuff and bootstraps and all that. I feel like I don't resonate with that a lot because I always like the term work. I've always hated that. And but I will work hard. Like I'll do 14-hour days in the studio and I'll play like for hours and hours and hours, but I feel like most of that is due to increase in inspiration. So mine kind of goes up and down. And then when I have a moment, it's like sets of waves coming in. And then when the big sets come in, I surf it, surf it, surf it, and I get a lot done. And so I do put in a lot of time, but to me, it's play. So that's how I have to like flip it. I have to make sure that my mind sees it as play and inspiration and not work and the hustle or the grind and all that. Cause that's just the way my personality works. Like, well, I'll be putting in the same time,
Right.
and that the grind part or the hustle part that, and I have this conversation a lot with friends of mine, because on the road, we're on the road perpetually year round. And even when you make a lot of money, it doesn't stop. Like something, it's just your modus operandi. So you keep doing it. And so having really young kids, I was like, hey, I don't want to be out here all the time. I want to be home more. And then it started making me like look at things differently until I actually like turned my ship all the way around 180 degrees. And now I'm like, I want to be on the road as little as possible and make the most money and have the most time with my kids. But to your point and philosophy, I'm 56 now, so it's kind of the time for me to, you know, I've been hustling and I did do it, man. I grinded out every nasty college bar in the country. Just ugh, the bathrooms. Oh, I mean, really yucky stuff. To
Yeah.
where no wonder I was drinking so much, you know. But then I had to wrestle that gorilla because it's like, look, you can't be dying trying to make a living. It's like you're not in a coal mine where you just have to breathe this stuff. Like you cannot drink the alcohol. So but then I got to deal with drunk people. And so I either want to get away from them or drink myself so I don't have, so I'm not, it's not a drag, to deal
Yeah.
with it. And that was a whole thing. And my solution was that was just to get out. It's just, I don't go to bars. I don't play bars. I don't,
Right.
even my friends that come to town, I feel bad because they want me to come sit in. I'm going to bed with my kids at like 8 o'clock. Like what time you start? I'm like, man, that's way too late.
I'm already 4 hours in. Uh,
And I got to be up at 6:30 or 5:30 because we ride 16 miles every day, starting at 6:30 a.m. So I can't be hanging out with you drunk till 4 a.m. and then like 2.5 hours later, you're like, oh no, I like flipped it all. But I did do the grind. There's no escaping that part.
yeah, we're gonna dive into all that too, man. But just say, what did your parents do? What was their career?
My mom was a nurse at DC General Hospital for 30 some years, and then my dad was a social worker that worked with juvenile delinquents.
Oh wow, so they were like really giving back, in both of their careers. You
Both
know,
very service oriented, yeah. And so it was not an option for us to like get in trouble. They would be like, if you get arrested, call somebody else. Like save your one phone call for somebody else. Don't call us because you had no business putting yourself in that position. I mean, it was like I was more scared of them than the police.
right?
So, it was in a good way. I mean, my dad, I never was abused physically, but you know, I was.
You didn't want to get in that position. I get it. My mom.
Oh, my dad was a boxer in the Marines. He like never taught me to fight because we went to these really rich white schools, but we lived in the hood. And I'm thinking, like, why did my dad ever teach me to defend myself, And he didn't want me hitting one of those rich white kids when I lived in Southeast. So
Yeah, I
now
don't
I
know.
get it. But my son's going to learn, I don't like, there weren't really bullies at my school, so there was that. But there's just some weird people out there, and I want my son to be able to at least defend himself. I don't want him to beat anyone up, but, I'm going to be different about that.
Yeah. Well, talk to me a little bit about. You mentioned like I know you went to Sidwell Friends, which is like the elite private school in the DC area. I mean, like President Obama's kids went there, I believe, and
A
everyone,
couple other
like
president's kids, too, yeah.
yeah. So you were very very arts oriented growing up. Your parents. Sounds like your parents really pushed. I know you did some acting. You said you were a dancer. Obviously, you were very gifted in music. How did you end up at Sidwell? Like it's
Well, that started really early. I asked my mom that. I was like, how do we get in the, because Kofi was so gifted. She met this lady, what's her name? Oh, she told me, and I wrote it down. I'm confusing it with a teacher. I think it was Mrs. Burwell. It was a lady from Howard University, and she, um, because Kofi was so exceptional, they evaluated him, and they realized he was academically very smart too, which we all were. My parents were very bookish, and they were the first ones in their family to be able to go to college. So it was always like premium. The life my parents could have had we not all gone to private school. I mean, you talk about sacrifice, man, because they were just two middle class parents, but it was all about education. So this was like first grade for I started Potomac School in first grade, which was just like Sidwell. I mean, I went to school with the Kennedys and stuff, like
Wow.
Bobby and JFK's kids and stuff. And so Kofi was going there. They were going to try to get him a scholarship, and on the advice of this lady from Howard University. And my mom brought me and my sister there because she just didn't have daycare. So I'm babysitting my little sister and I'm reading to her, and I was 4 years old. I'm sitting in the office while they're dealing with Kofi. And the lady asked my mom, I was like, "How old is he? He's like reading really well for 4 years old. Like, that's crazy." And or reading really well for that age. She said he's four, and she was like, "That's nuts." And my son is exactly like that now. It's so funny. He just got evaluated by his teachers. We had our first parent teacher conference. He's in kindergarten, and they told us he's reading at a second grade level. And I was like, I knew he was advanced, but I didn't know he was like that far ahead. So anyway, they were like, well, we need to get Oteil in there too. So now both of us have scholarships to this elite school. It took my mom like an hour and a half to drive there
Wow.
from Southeast Washington because of traffic. So she would do graveyard shifts, get home at like 7 a.m. or whatever, or before that, actually. Cook us breakfast, get us out the door, drive us to McLean, Virginia, and back, which is it's just insane the amount of sacrifice that she made. But it really helped us because I never went to college, but the education that I got between Potomac School, which I started in first grade, and Sidwell Friends, which I started in seventh grade, just was gave me enough good foundation and critical thinking and stuff like that, and that I could move throughout the world, you know, comfortably. I just needed to master my addictions. That was my hang up, you know.
So, well, talk to me about that a little bit, man, if you don't mind getting into it a little. So
Yeah.
when you got out of, so you when you graduated Sidwell Friends, what was the next step?
I got a gig thanks to my brother at this in Virginia Beach with this top 40 beach band called the Squares. And they just played like 5 nights a week. They had a gig right on the hotel bar that was on the beach, right? So the crowd was built in. Summertime is when you made most of your money, and then off season you would do okay. We did some more gigs in like Norfolk, Virginia, where you had to drive 30 minutes uh, inland, but we did just fine. Like throughout the course of the year, I made plenty of money, and I was just like, "Wow, why was everybody so worried about me being a musician? Like this is a piece of cake. The tunes are easy, and I'm playing 5 nights a week. Like really, I could have bought a house back then if I had any kind of, you know, sense of looking forward. But I was so young, I was just completely green. And then so that was a great experience. And Kofi and I ended up living together for a couple of years because he got a gig with a band that was our main competition. And the drummer with that band was my best friend before Kofi moved there. He kind of took me under his wing because Kofi had talked to him ahead of time, and he found me. And it's funny. It's really making me realize like how my mentors all along the way, like between my dad and Kofi, the music teachers I had at home, then Eddie Castillo in Virginia Beach, and then Colonel Bruce Hampton in Atlanta. Like all along the way, the universe provided me an elder person that had compassion for me and really taught me, you know, some crucial things. like Eddie Castillo was super important in my life because he was like my older brother before Kofi got there.
He was a
And
drummer, Eddie Castillo. That he was a
yeah,
drummer. Okay, okay.
and it turns out we're related by marriage, which we didn't find out till like last year.
Amazing.
Because our families are close together in Key West, Florida. The whole thing is so mystical and crazy. But yeah, he taught me how to write cheat sheets so I could learn tunes really fast, which I still use to this day. When I was learning like Dead and Company, trying to learn 120 Grateful Dead songs really fast, you know. And then Eddie also taught me like how to just take care of myself being on my own because I was terrified, man, being on my own. I never went to college, so all of a sudden I'm just in this little apartment in Virginia Beach by myself, and I know one guy, and that's Eddie Castillo and the people that I'm working with.
Wow.
And I was really looking back, I was really terrified. If it wasn't for him, I don't know honestly what I would have done. And that's when I picked up drinking because I've always had stage fright, and it's a terrifying experience even to this day. And I discovered vodka, and I had a vodka shot, uh, and all of a sudden I felt like Superman. And it didn't deter my playing at all at first, which was terrible because it never deterred me from drinking. And I didn't really have hangovers because I would just wake up and like do a bong hit and then I'd feel fine again. And that's like, you know, that's being 19, right? Like da da da. So I had no deterrence whatsoever. And it finally caught up with me later in my later 20s when it was just like, okay, this is ridiculous, you know. But and it was actually because I thought I couldn't play. I think I was 28 and we played Variety Playhouse with Colonel Bruce Hampton.
I know it well.
And I was doing my usual drinking and smoking routine, you know, and then someone put a bottle of champagne. It was New Year's Eve, so there's a bottle of champagne appeared in front of every musician, you know, right before midnight. So the last thing I really remember is turning up the bottle like this, and then I remember feeling like I was out of control. Now I heard the gig later, and I wasn't, but the fact that I wasn't sure, really, that was the first time I was like, all right, yeah, we got to cut this because you have to be able to do your thing. So I think that was always my saving grace. Like I had put one thing before partying, and it
Music.
was like if I couldn't play, we gotta, because that's all I'm here for. That's the only thing I know on earth that makes any sense whatsoever. I had no belief in God or anything like that before then. I had no kids or wife, so I hadn't, you know, I didn't know what I was living for really. And so I that was the one thing, and that kept me from getting too far out, you know. And I
Hmm.
also had a needle phobia, so that took care of heroin. And I never liked cocaine. I just didn't dig it. And so that took care of that. So alcohol was really the one that I had to get under control. And it took me till 40,
Yeah.
you know, but I did it. Yeah.
Well, congrats, man. I mean, that's a big thing.
What's that? You need to have that reason. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Absolutely.
That's the whole thing for me. And at the beginning, it was just like, I don't know, I had a huge spiritual awakening and I had to be like, okay, when you were happy without all this crap at some point, you know? So what were you doing then? Like go back to doing that, you know? And that was the beginning of it for me.
I love it, man. Okay, let me just ask you one question before we get kind of go further into your journey. Your parents were huge, like academic. My mom was the same way, you know. So my mom was a single parent. She raised my brother and I. She was a government doctor, so we had like, you know, it wasn't like she was like this like baller doctor. We lived in like a blue collar neighborhood, and
Yeah.
you know, she worked 9 to 5 so she could take care of us. There's just her and my brother who's 7 years older than me. And for her, all that mattered to her was that we became doctors. Like she's like, you two need to stand on your own 2 feet. And all her whole life was sacrificed. She sacrificed everything for us. Like very much how you describe your mom, how she'd work the graveyard shift, cook your breakfast, take you to school. That's like what my mom did. All she cared about was academics. You know. Um, so you know, when you decided not to go to college, was that like a big deal?
Woo! I'm the only one. It's funny, I'm the only one in my family that never went to college, and I'm financially the most successful, you
Of
know.
course.
But but yeah, it was a big deal. It was a big deal. And the turning point was, my parents always about everything, drugs, alcohol, sex, whatever. They're like, look, we're not going to agree with whatever, but you can come to us. So I always felt like I could come to them in honesty. And I told them, I was like, look, and they could see I was obsessed. I was
Hmm.
obsessed with the bass guitar from 15 years old on. I picked it up at 14, blah, blah, blah. When I had to stop dancing, I got so depressed, and that was my therapy. And then when Kofi started training me, because I'm a drummer. I had taken lessons on a bunch of different instruments, but I didn't know harmony. I knew rhythm and I knew how to read music on other instruments, but I didn't know how to improvise harmonically. So when he started training me on that, I just went down the rabbit hole and never came out. So one day I just had a talk with him. They had this thing where around about 15 years old, they start telling me, you got to move out at 18. You're going to either be in college or have a job or whatever. You're going to be out of here.
Hmm.
So, I knew that day was coming, and I just was like, look, I don't want to go to school and I don't want to move out. So I'm asking you guys, will you let me stay home for just a year and let me just practice? So I could just get so good that when I get that, there can be no doubt, like nobody's going to do the gig any better than me. And I was already pretty good at that point. Um, and they said, yeah, they trusted me and they let
Wow.
me do it. And then a friend of mine who was a really rich guy in high school, he inherited his first whatever amount of money, and then he bought a house and asked me to move in. He said, I won't charge you rent if you'll just teach me. So we were playing like 8 hours a day between me giving him lessons and then I'm practicing, and then I had other students, just gigs and whatever. And so that was a real blessing. And but it was a really big deal, yeah, that I didn't go to school. Super big.
But
Super.
yeah, that was just like kind of reading through your story. I definitely that was one of the things I had to ask you because I figured as much, man. So you're in Virginia Beach. Is it the next step Atlanta after that?
Yeah, and that's when the real world set in.
Did your brother go to Atlanta too? Was Kofi in Atlanta
We
also?
did, and we just starved. It was brutal. I mean, it was good for me. I remember my mom calling me, and I was staying somewhere, and she basically pointed out, she's like, "Okay, you don't have money right now. You're not homeless yet, and you still have food, and apparently you still have a little bit of weed. So like, you're rich in time." And I didn't get that back then, but now I get it. Rich in time, because at a certain point in my life, time became more worth more than money.
Hmm.
So, but you have to go through those things, and honestly, if I hadn't hit that bottom, the bottom is what led to meeting Colonel Bruce,
So,
because
well, like, what were you doing during those years, man? So, like, just random
anything,
gigs.
anything I could. I was playing reggae gigs, country gigs, smooth jazz gigs, like regular jazz gigs, Latin gigs, uh, any wedding gig. I was in a tuxedo, putting on the monkey suit. I played the big band gigs. I played anything I could, man. I was just trying to make enough to get some pizza for the day and keep some kind of a paid on a room. And it was really tough, man. And then I met the Colonel because the drummer Jeff Sipe was like, he knew how frustrated I was, and
He was a well-known musician at the time, like a successful musician at the time, right?
oh, we were all kind of a
Grinding.
little bit starving that back then. Yeah, I mean, he had been on the scene in Atlanta for years before I had, so people knew who he was, and he introduced us to a lot of people, and so did Sam Guest, one of the guys I was playing with down there, who was kind of another like cover band. But he said, a lot of guys when they're frustrated to get their yayas out, they go play with this crazy guy, Colonel Bruce Hampton. I was like, well, whatever. I'm game. And the Colonel.
But someone discouraged you from doing that, right? Before they were like,
Oh yeah, this was after I really started playing with him.
all right, cool.
It was funny. So yeah, this would be good for people if this ever happens to you. But the colonel didn't even look like a musician. He looked like he could actually be like a homeless person.
Yeah.
And he just looked very disheveled and always had like a mustard stain or something. And one part of his shirt was untucked and the other part was still in. His zipper was open or something. It just looked like everything looked wrong. And then, like, right, we had only known each other for a really short time. And he just looks at me, goes, August 24th at 2 in the morning. And I was like, whoa, I was born at 1:57 in the morning. So I was like, what? What? Okay. How'd you do that? And he said, well, he starts trying to explain, knowing that it would just sound like absolute poppycock to me, you know. And so I kind of started following him after that because I was like, something's up with this guy, and I just got to know. And his whole thing was, look, you're not going to make any money here, but you're going to have the time of your life. And I was like, okay, at least something's going to improve. And boy, was he right. And again, with the theme of my life, inspiration, with inspiration and joy, everything followed it. He picked the worst night of the week. He asked his club, give me a Monday night. And he gave everybody a penny back. It was 99 cents every Monday night. So ridiculous, you know? And we packed it out. We'd have a line out the door, you know? And then we'd say, okay, now let's go to Athens, or let's do a Saturday night. Then we pack it out. Then we go to Athens, Georgia, and do like a Friday night there and then a Saturday night. So then we had Monday, Friday, Saturday. I was like, oh, I'm eating. Absolutely little. I mean, we're not making money at all, but I was like steady money. And then we kind of widened our circle. Then we went to Nashville. We went to Macon, Georgia. We went to North Florida, Gainesville, Florida, and then it got wider. And then, you know, other bands like Widespread Panic and Fish and Blues Traveler uh, found out about us, and then we were like their favorite band. And then they took us out on tour with them. And then when they did that Horde tour, which was like all
Yeah.
the bands came together to try to get into bigger venues, we were the opening band. And like the managers, none of them wanted us on there at all. And all the bands were like, if they don't do it, we quit. And that
Wow.
was like so touching to me. Like I can almost still cry about it because again, there was like somebody came up to like be an advocate. And so I'm always like this bootstraps thing, while it's fine and it probably works for some people, and some people are self-starters. Like John Mayer's like that. Like he'll just do it. What you see he did in his kitchen or his living room, like he just does it all himself. But for the rest of us, it was like, you know, or for in my case, there were people all along the way that came along and were just like angels of mercy, you
Yeah, but
know.
I gotta just interject a little bit, man. I totally agree with you, man. And I think you're 100% right. But you're also like a super humble guy, and you were ready to capitalize on those opportunities, right? So that opportunity presented itself to a million people, man. Not a million, maybe 50 to 100 people. But you were able to capitalize on it because you were such a gifted musician, and people saw something special in you as well. And all that hard work you put in to get there, even though it wasn't work for you, it was like, you were putting an effort just to get better at your craft.
Hours, yeah.
It's like the universe works in a way, like that's
But
in my,
to your point too, also, the guy that took me out to lunch. And this dude, I was super poor right now. He was like, hey, can I take you out to lunch? I was like, hell yeah, you can take me out to lunch. I get to eat something more than like a slice of mellow mushroom pizza. Sweet, I could get a salad with that. So he takes me out, and this is the super early days with Colonel, and he was genuinely looking out for my best interest. So I'm not dogging him out. And he was like, but it just made me laugh when I realized why. So somewhere in the lunch, he was like, well, look, man, I just want to talk to you about this Colonel Bruce guy. And I was like, oh, yeah, he's just nuts. And he's like, man, I really don't think you should play with him. Like, it's going to really hurt your career. Now, he's thinking locally in Atlanta, right? So there's two lessons in that. One is, don't think small, right? I've already left my hometown twice. So I'm not, I have no desire to go back to Washington D.C. whatsoever. Never have. I doubt I ever will. Right. So I already wasn't thinking just locally, other than I wanted to survive. Yeah. But the other one is when someone doesn't see what you see and they're trying to, even if they have your best interest at heart, you just have to be like, well, I appreciate that, but I'm sorry, like, trust your vision. So I agree with you what you're saying, because a guy, and I found this out, I found the proof of what you're saying in an interesting way. When the George Floyd thing happened, I started posting a lot about what I know about Black history and stuff. And this guy was like, you're a limousine liberal. Why are you saying all this stuff? This country's been really good to you and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, hey, man, wait a minute. First of all, the reason I'm successful, my parents, having my parents, there's a good damn chance I was going to be successful. And then I also have a really bold personality. Like, I took some crazy chances that people like this dude took his time and money to take me out to lunch to go, don't do this. And I was like, thanks for lunch. Off the cliff, like, I had no intention of listening to that guy, because I was so led by my inspiration and my original vision for what I wanted to get done. And here, this guy, while coming from totally left field, somehow aligned with, it was just, I knew, I was like, I don't know what's going on over here. Like, if you met an extraterrestrial, like, for real, if you opened up a guy in the hospital and you were like, oh shit, and the guy comes to, and he's like, yeah, so you saw, huh? He's like, yeah, I saw. He's like, okay, don't tell anybody, but and so then you want to learn, you're like, well, so what's up, dude? You've been here this whole time, you know? um, so that's how it was for me. And man, it just changed my life. If it wasn't for him, I would not have been musically prepared, or in life too, in some other ways, for the Allman Brothers and for the Grateful Dead, because that's not the track I was on. I was like on the jazz rock fusion track, and a lot of those guys are just starving. Like, they literally will move to Europe because they can't work here.
Right. That's very true, man. But why was the Aquarium Rescue Unit such like a polarizing force for, like, in managers' eyes? Like, was it Colonel Bruce? Like,
well, I mean,
musicians. I mean, there's amazing musicianship.
but we had no crowd. It's all money. They don't give a damn. Like, you have very few people that do high art and also are financially successful, right? Like, in the old days, in Duke Ellington's time, the highest art was also the dance music. Like, so you have like Miles, and then you have the people that played with Miles, and then like the rest of us are just sidemen. They got to go to Europe to make a living or teach or whatever. It's very. That's why I have a hard time with guys that get bitter about their career, because I'm like, dude, all these jazz musicians, these guys are just playing on such high levels, and they're like, can't make it. You're still doing $50 gigs in New York. Like, come on, man. Like, that's a long line, and you're nearer to the back of it.
Right.
So don't get bitter. Just stay in and keep doing your thing. So we had no following. We had only advocates and they were the ones with the following. So they were like, why are these guys on? I got 10 other bands that could help put more butts in seats.
Got it.
See, to their credit, they were like, we'll put the butts in seats, and these guys are our inspiration. We want Aquarium Rescue to get us all like fired up before we go on. And what an honor. And I didn't even really, like, I kind of knew that, but now being older, I can see it more clearly. I wasn't even really as cognizant of that back then as I
You were like musicians, like, you're the band that musicians went to go see.
Yeah. I mean, we were lucky. I mean, I did this interview when I got the Allman Brothers gig, and they were like, well, how do you feel being like, one of the true founders of the jam band scene? I was like, what's that? I didn't even know it had a name.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it was just all deadheads, like hippies, and what I called neo hippies, like trust fund hippies or whatever.
Yeah.
And which I don't have anything against. Thank you guys for helping me put my kids through private school. But, not judging.
Yeah.
And they do the road miles, so you can't say,
Yeah.
I couldn't there's no amount of money that I could have already where I would not miss any of the Dead and Company shows, like do every single one. Like, I don't know. I have an admiration for anybody that follows us from gig to gig, you know.
Loyal fans, man. So let's just talk about Colonel Bruce a little bit. So someone had, as my friend, our Jared is a friend of mine, and you know as well. Told me a great line about Colonel Bruce. He said, like Bruce was just like this mystical figure who just like literally dropped bombs on you, and like you think about them really for honestly for like the rest of your life. Like these things would sit in your mind. And one of the things that he said was, which I think is such an amazing line, he said, "Who you actually are far exceeds than who you think you are." Right? Like that's like a Colonel Bruceism.
Drilled that to me from the very beginning. Yeah, he did.
So, what can you tell me what that means to you? Like, what does he mean exactly when he says that? Like that we have endless potential. That's the way I read that.
It's a philosophical thing, like, you know, um, I mean, it's such a wide thing, and I look at it in terms of mysticism. I mean, let me approach it this way. The first book he ever gave me was the Book of the Tao, right? And so a lot of that, and now it's at 56, that's my go-to. Like all religious books are, but that's still just like my one. So in Bruce's belief system, everything comes out of the unknown. All of the seen comes from the unseen. That's why you see him, you hear the same language. It's mystics. It's the same stuff that Sun Ra was talking about, right? Jiddu Krishnamurti was one of his big ones. The unknown. And so out of the unknown springs all this order, all this intricacy. You know what I mean? Like that things would even evolve, like they subtly just keep changing, and like everything's pushing towards life. It's an amazing, miraculous, mystical thing to us, maybe not to other people. So in that vein, he's like the thing that created you and the thing that you are a part of. If you could look at the hugeness of it, you will realize that things are bigger than what you're like. Our society teaches us to like compartmentalize. Like even doctors specialize in one thing. You don't go to the ear doctor for the knee or whatever. You know what I mean? And so he's like, he wants to zoom out and look at the whole body and how it works. So he's thinking of the universe or the multiverse. So, and he also is a great, he has a great understanding of human nature. And so he sees how we limit ourselves. And we do the same thing in terms of our music. And that's his thing. It's like your music is a reflection of your life, for better or worse. So if your perception of life is like this, your music is going to be like this. And he wants your music to be like this.
Right.
For your own benefit, not for his, even. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay. I said, so how do I break this box that I've created around myself, you know? And he didn't say this explicitly, but basically he was like, well, that's what I'm for. But you have to let me do it. I can't just you have to give me the permission and I'll destroy it completely for you. And I was like, all right, let's do this. So then he would do things that seemed silly. He was like, try to play like the first time you played when you couldn't play. And I was like, damn, because that's honest.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, if you're being honest and you're playing, at some point, I'm going to hear that too. It doesn't need to be, you know, and this speaks to like allowing yourself to make mistakes, which is a huge thing if you're going to improvise, right?
That's a huge thing in life, actually.
Well, and because we need to improvise in life, right? We don't know, like, we plan to go right, and then all of a sudden a tsunami comes and is like, guess what? We need to all go that way right now. So that's just that. Improvise, go, you know? So I thought, wow, and I couldn't do it. And I was like, wow, how can he stump me? And this guy can't even really play. Like, technically, he doesn't have a lot of chops, but he could stump me time and time, seemingly like off the top of his head, right? So finally, I just am like, you know, I'm one of those people. I just gotta like, I just take the challenge, you know? And I was like, oh, I know what to do. So I took my bass and I flipped it this way. And I actually had to look like to make sure that this finger was on the same string as this finger. And before I hit a note, he was already laughing. He's like, that's it," because he could tell there needs to be that threat that it might not work. He loved that. He's like, that's the drama of life. Like when the guy, bases are loaded and there's one, can you make this hit and you're either gonna lose or you're just gonna cry. And so then I hit the note and it was all messed up. And he was like, yeah, that's it. But the lesson was, he was like, I want you to be able to access that when you're playing the other way, just in the interest of being completely honest. Like, I want all of it. I want to hear you with your cologne and all showered up and your hair is done and your nails are manicured and everybody. But I also want to hear you with bad breath and you need a haircut and you haven't shaved and you're stinking and like he wanted all of it. He wanted to hear me embarrass myself. He wanted to hear me build the Sistine Chapel or the Eiffel Tower, but he also wanted to hear me like blast it with bombs and tear it down. He wanted to hear joy and sorrow. He wanted to hear blood and life and death. He wanted the whole thing. And so no one ever, like when they're teaching you to play an instrument, they don't teach you that stuff.
Right.
And sometimes life just has to happen to you. Like until he would be like, didn't you have a dog die or something? But I mean, we're so young. We hadn't had a mom die, or it's like, some people have tragedies earlier on, but we hadn't had a lot of that. So I had a pretty charmed life,
Right.
So, but he knew I had access to all that. He just wanted to make sure that all that other that I didn't buy into all that bullshit and just like completely like pull off all my clothes and be there naked on stage,
I was actually in Atlanta. I was in Atlanta from 93 to 97. I was there for college. And I actually never, it's interesting. My friend got involved with Colonel Bruce after we had already graduated. But we actually went to our first Fish shows together. I went to like a million Dead shows, like in Jerry time. And which was cool. And, but it's interesting. So Colonel Bruce, to me, just from speaking with Jared, my buddy, he always surrounded himself with, just amazing virtuosic musicians, And I asked Jared, I was like, well, could Colonel Bruce, like, could he play? Because I play guitar, he played, we all play, And I got pretty heavy into guitar actually, and he's like, well, let's put it this way. He's like, Colonel Bruce said it's all about timing and tone, and like he could just rail on one note for like minutes, and it works, it just works. And I thought that was so interesting, kind of like what you were saying too, like like he didn't have like the chops, but he had he got it.
He didn't even need an instrument.
Right.
He said, there should be the threat. There's a certain anticipation, which we all have. The lights come down.
Yeah.
And then, so he was like, if you know what's going to happen, you've already ruined it. Now, if you don't know totally what's going to happen, that threat is real. Like people can feel it. People really can feel it, Yeah. And he always wanted that. And Jared, I gotta say, man, Jared is. I've had pretty deep talks with him about the Colonel. He's a really great guy at explaining.
Yeah, he's got a way with words, man. Yeah.
He's one of the few. He really gets it and can explain it too. Because Bruce could do. He one time he had a shoe and he's like, you don't even need a guitar. He goes, watch it. He takes his shoe off and he holds it there, And so he's just holding it, and that's all he does. And because he doesn't do anything, people are going more and more. They're like, what the? And then they start they're creating scenarios in their own head.
Yeah.
Then it's like, and you can just feel the threat and the anticipation just building. And then he just drops it and walks off. And people are like, and he looks at me like, it's just like, he's like, I don't even need it. You don't need an instrument, Oteil. Instruments are for cowards. That's why he'd say, tuning's for cowards. Line your pegs up straight. Make sure they're all straight. Then it's in tune. We'd just be like, yeah. But then he'd go watch and he'd detune his guitar and play the most amazing shit. And we'd be on the floor just dying because it was really melodic. And he would play phrases and sentences and make a paragraph and tell his whole story. And then we'd all be on the floor and he'd be like, see, tuning's for cowards. I was just like, it was like watching a miracle worker. That
unbelievable.
He showed you on stage that he was right and you were wrong. He's like, watch me. It was amazing.
It's amazing. Did he make a good living? Like, was he a starving musician or what?
Okay. Bruce was totally psychic. Gigs kind of were the feeder for his gambling. And gambling's really how he made his living.
Oh, really?
And he went up and down because sometimes he would get. I mean, he played long shots. That's how he did it, and sometimes you lose. And you know, it's a whole nother story. But yeah, Bruce could have been rich. Um, but a lot of psychics are like that. Like I studied these guys, they did remote viewing for the CIA, and all this is public knowledge. So this is not a conspiracy theory, but the CIA hired these guys because the Russians did in the 70s, and they were like, we don't know whether it works or not, but we're going to do it. So they got this team of people together to do it, to see if they could really do it, and they really could do it. And as they did different things, one group from them was like, well, let's play the stock market and just see how you did. And they did great. And you know what? They got bored with it. They got bored with it.
No risk, no excitement.
It just was like, okay, so we can do this. And that wasn't their thing. Like gambling's not my thing, or I had other addictions, but that wasn't one of them, and it wasn't theirs either, and they just let it go. I think they knew, well, I'm going to be okay in life. I'm going to be provided. I'm going to have food and a roof over my head. Like I don't need to be a billionaire. Like and Bruce was very much like that. Like it didn't matter. In fact, when he was about to be successful, every time it happened, he would sabotage it himself. So he purposely did not make a good living. He could have been immensely wealthy, immensely, and worshipped, but he didn't want the idolatry either. He was like, oh, no, 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 Plus, I think with too much attention on it, they would have found out he was an extraterrestrial, and then there'd been a whole can of worms dealing with the NSA and the CIA and who else, who God knows who else.
Could be bothered.
They play the fool a lot. They play the fool. Yeah. Son Ron, let me tell you something. Him and Bruce, those guys, man, they didn't want the FBI and the NSA and stuff messing with them. They were like, nah, they're playing the fool. But
that's so from Aquarium Rescue Unit, you were, I guess, someone in the Atlanta music scene. All my brothers were looking for a bass player, and someone in the Atlanta music scene must have referred you to Greg Allman or Dickie Betts or something at that point, right?
I was actually Butch Trucks, the drummer, because I was doing a side project with him.
Oh, were you? Okay.
Which he had been doing in the past with Jimmy Herring, who was a guitarist from Aquarium Rescue, and Derek Trucks, and they pulled me into that. And then while we were about to go into rehearsal, we were about to go in rehearsals for that, and Warren Haynes and Alan Woody quit the band. They were at the Beacon Theater, and so J-Mo knew me from the past, from like the jazz world in Atlanta, and then Butch knew me from playing with him and Jimmy and Derek. So they pulled me in. But Bert Holman later did tell me, for the people listening to your podcast, I asked him one time, I said, why did you pick me? And he said, well, we called people that we knew all over the country, in different places, and they all had the same story about you. And I was like, okay, well, I guess it was a good one. He said, yeah. They said, great player, nice guy. That's, I was a wild man, drinking, chasing women, smoking the best pipe. But I wasn't like a,
You're a good dude.
Evil guy. Yeah, I was I'm the happy drunk. People would say, like, I had got drunk one time, and long after I quit drinking with some buddies, that they were new friends, and they were like, the next day they were like, dude, you're a really happy drunk. I was like, well, cool, that's good. I'm glad I turned belligerent, and so that was a good lesson for me, because at all those crappy college bars that I played, you never know who's watching you. Mm-hmm. But the promoter's watching you, and promoters talk to other promoters all the way. It's a small world. The promoter world is a small world. Mm-hmm. And so even though they might be promoting this little club, their friends might be doing the biggest shows in town, or they might be doing the biggest shows in town down to the small clubs.
Right.
So I was like, wow, cool. Well, I'm glad I did play all those shitty clubs, you know.
I'm telling you, everything happens for a reason, man. All that hustle, somehow pays off.
Yeah.
What? So tell me about the first gig with the Allman Brothers. Like, do they audition you or what? Is it like, or you?
First, I got the gig, and then Dickie wanted to have auditions when he realized that like I didn't have any of their records. And to be fair, he was like, there's probably someone that grew up in the South
Yeah.
that knows all of our stuff already, that worshipped us, that knows what we are. And
Yeah.
I was like, okay, whatever, I'm just like, I knew I could do it. And especially after playing with the Colonel, I had a much better understanding of it. And they also wanted, although they weren't sure at the time, what I had to bring to it. Because those guys always like, everybody loves jazz cats,
Totally. Because you're playing it.
And, if they're not too snobby to open themselves up to rock and roll or funk or whatever,
Yeah.
blues or anything, country, bluegrass, whatever, I'm open to everything. And so we ended up having auditions, and I still got it.
I want to share one story. I think I read this in an interview somewhere that you had done, and someone was asking you, well, like, did you listen to the Allman Brothers? Like, did you have all their albums? Did you know all their music and stuff? And you're like, well, I was at a high school party, and you were like walking from room to room, and Whipping Post, I think, happened to be playing. You were just like, stop for me, like, oh, this is pretty cool. And that was like the first time you're like, hey, what is this? They're like, oh, this is the Allman Brothers. You don't know the Allman Brothers? Like, no, but this sounds cool. And then that was like when you were 18, and then the next time you heard the Allman Brothers when you actually were playing with them. Is that true?
Well, I mean, I'm sure I heard them at some point,
Yeah, but
because I hear them all the time when I walk into restaurant stores or whatever, but I didn't know it. I think that same thing about Grateful Dead now, because all the time I hear Dead songs, I'm like, oh yeah, I start singing the background parts or whatever. I'm like, how many times did I hear this in my life? And it just went, and I didn't even
yeah,
realize. It was
so
just,
wild.
you know.
So tell me about that first gig, man. So tell me about that first gig with the Allman. Was that at the Beacon or?
No, it was June '97.
How old were you at that point? So you were
I
30,
was 32.
32. Okay.
And it was in Boston at Great Woods Amphitheater. I don't know what the hell they call it now. And I refuse to.
Yeah, something corporate.
The Dunkin' Donuts Amphitheater or whatever. But yeah, I'll never forget that, because we opened with the first song I learned, which was the first song on their first album, "Don't Want You No More." Do, 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 bow, ba-da. So it just, and then it goes into Cross to Bear, which I can literally, if I think about that song long enough, the hair will stand up on my arm and I'll probably tear up. That song never got old, man, in 17 years. So to open that way, like the way the Allman Brothers starts in history, was just like at Great Woods. Fortunately for me, I played a bunch of these amphitheaters before with the Horde tour. So I wasn't completely, of course, when we went on, they were empty. By the time Widespread or Fish or Blues Traveler went on, it was full. But I was used to like how much reverb there was, how long it took for a note to stop making a sound after I cut it off. And but it still was overwhelming, because now, as the new guy, all eyes are on you. Everybody knows what the other guys are going to do, and they're like, how's he gonna, and there's a certain amount of this.
Yeah.
I'm just like, but we were getting into some good jams, so I felt good about it. The band made me feel good about it, but you just can't help but be like, this is big. Like, it's big. You could see it coming a mile away. Like, if you're going to blast off into space, you know, 2 years from now, or let's say at that point it was like 3 months or something. Okay, you got 3 months to prepare yourself. When you're in the seat, you feel the fire start. You're gonna freak out.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I had a drink and smoked something before I went on. And I was just like doing wine. I probably more just wine at that point, a couple glasses of wine. And it was terrifying. But Greg Allman told me that he never stopped being nervous. And I found this out from his ex-wife. You know, after about a week, everybody does laundry. So I'm coming down the hotel with my laundry bag, and Greg, they weren't married at the time, but his wife Stacy was dragging this enormous clothes bag down the hall. I was like, Jesus, that looks like clothes for like 2 weeks or 3 weeks. That is a lot of laundry. She goes, oh, well, Greg sweats through like 4 shirts a night. I was like, what? She's like, oh, honey, he gets so nervous. I was like, really? After all these gigs? She goes, honey, he'll sweat through one shirt on the way to the gig. And then he'll go through one on at on stage. Then he'll change. That's number 3. Then he'll put on another one after the gig to. And I was like, wow, I thought I got nervous,
Amazing.
And but he's told me, so I talked to him about it, and he said, man, if it didn't happen, I'd be worried. And I think what it does is it goes back to a thing that Colonel Bruce was adamant about. He said, I want you to play like there's a loaded gun up your ass and someone hostile with their finger on the trigger, like, do it right, or it's, you know what I mean? He wanted that urgency, and that nervousness is that. And Greg was like, if I don't have that, it's almost like go, and you just, it just comes out, And there's something about that thing that people can feel that,
Yeah.
It's electrical.
I mean, I see the Allman Brothers a million times with you in it. When I'm from New York, so we used to go to the Beacon shows all the time, and it was like every night was amazing. There's just the energy was there. It was never like, oh, it's the same old shit, like tired gig. It never felt like that. It was always a lot of energy. It was loud. It was like it was just badass.
Yeah.
It was amazing, man.
Yeah, if they don't become like that, when it's not like that, I quit. You can't let music become a job. Like, whatever, man. That's not, I went through too much stuff, man, for it to be like that.
Yeah, totally, man.
Yeah.
So
you don't know, your days are not guaranteed. I had this thought a lot. Like, everybody in my life that died, I think, including my brother. You think back to the last gig, it's like, what if someone told you that's the last gig you were ever going to play with them? So what if it's my last gig? I don't know, for real. So people ask me, how do you have such a good time? I'm like, man, it might be the last one. That happiness is also a decision, not just a feeling, Have 2 months to live and you'll find that out,
No, you're absolutely right, man. Well, so when you were with the Allman Brothers, was that like your first real payday? Like, was that like?
Yeah. Woo. Yeah.
One story I read somewhere that you were flying out to the gig. I guess they were flying you out to Boston. I don't know if that was the deal. They're like, hey, do you want like a window seat or an aisle seat? And you're like, I don't care, man. I just don't want a middle seat. And you're like, well, they're like, Oteil, there's no middle seat in first class. And you're like, oh shit.
Yeah. I put my hand over the phone to my ex-wife. I was like, I'm flying first class. What? Like, that's when I knew it was getting serious, I was like, oh, a meal preference? The hell is that? Okay. Yeah, it was definitely, but I knew it. I knew I was stepping into that next level because I'd seen friends of mine, Dave Matthews Band opened for the Aquarium Rescue Unit one time, So I watched these guys go, and I remember my ex-wife's family, before we ever got married, they were like, well, what if music doesn't work out? I was like, there is no not working out. Like, all my eggs are in this basket.
Right.
It hasn't been working out for like 11 years now, however long it had been at that point. I said, but just so you understand, I've watched friends of mine go from being at the same point that I'm at to being millionaires. So it can happen. And the only way it can't happen is if I stop doing it. So when it does happen, I need to be there when it does. This is it. This is who I am. This is all I'm ever going to do. I've never been to school. I don't know how to do anything else. It's this or McDonald's, and I ain't going to be a McDonald's. So, and then, that conversation was when I was 28. At 32, I got the Allman Brothers gig. And you got to remember, I'm living in Birmingham, Alabama. So the Allman Brothers Band, they're like God, So I just went, bam, straight to the top. And I was like, see? And they're like, okay. It was crazy. We got the newspaper article from Birmingham. I still have it when I got the gig. I laminated it just for the kids or whatever.
Yeah, of course, man. And that's a huge milestone. So you know, one of my I gotta say, so during this quarantine period, like when we're home, like I'm like so I'm obsessed with music, and you know, yeah, I know you quit drinking, but you know, I'm still going strong. So we would be
Well,
home.
I drink, I have a little bit, just not my former glory.
So you know, we'd be you know, my wife and I would open up a bottle of wine or whatever, and like you know, we'd drink some wine, and then everyone would go to sleep. But you know, I just couldn't. I would stay up. So my buddy and I, who's also a guy who went, I've known since I was like 12 years old. Like we were like best friends in the world. We love both are obsessed with music. So we'd send each other like YouTube videos of what are we watching? It'd be like 3 a.m. Like, what are you watching? What are you watching? So I literally became obsessed with Tedeschi Trucks Band.
Yeah.
Like, so, I mean, God, like Midnight in Harlem, all those tunes, like they really, I could watch it a million times. And in fact, even now, before I go to bed, I'll pop in my AirPods and I'll watch some of those YouTube videos. And it just it really just hits you right here. Furthermore, her voice is like, oh my God, it's incredible. And then obviously Derek Trucks, and you're playing your brothers in a lot of those videos. You know, those you got 2 Grammys with those guys too, I think, right? Yeah, with the
I got one. I think they got another one maybe after I left. I'm not sure. My brother, or I think they got one before Tedeschi Trucks Band with Derek Trucks Band.
okay,
No, my brother had 2 or 3. No, I think he had 2 and I had 2. I can't remember.
but
Losing track of the Grammys, that's a quality problem, right?
talk to me about like that. I mean, that to me is got to be one of the most soulful bands, man. I mean, it's just amazing. You know, even like I don't, you weren't with them, but that Tiny Desk concert with them, you know, that NPR has,
After I left.
and I mean, it's just such a soulful band. The backup singers are soulful, like, you know, organ is soulful, like yeah, it's just such an amazing group. Talk to me about because you were part of the inception of that, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's me and Kofi. We were in the founding members. Yeah, it
And
was it was just a thing of like Susan had her band and Derek had his band. I was like, guys, come on, like. But they all had their individual band members. They didn't want to put people out of work and stuff.
right,
And but at a certain point, they decided to do it. And me and Kofi hadn't played together in many years, not like every night, all night. We had played together, like jammed and stuff, and recorded, but we hadn't like been in a band together for, geez, how many years? Like 11 or something. I don't know exactly. It was a long time. So, but Derek and Susan are both like super uh, steeped and coming out of that blues tradition. So it's all the old black music, blues, gospel, R&B, funk, all that stuff. And then Derek added in the classical Indian stuff too.
yeah, yeah,
Qawwali,
yeah,
Pakistani,
yeah, yeah,
you
totally.
Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, those
Where
guys.
he's playing like raga stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that's those that was always the roots of it. Same with Allman Brothers Band. It just comes out of the South.
yeah,
All that stuff, all the and so this was like our rendition of Allman Brothers and all the stuff that came before us, all our heroes.
it's beautiful stuff, man.
Yeah,
So
we put a lot of hardcore funk in there, but with me and Kofi, like
yeah,
it's gonna happen. And with JJ and Falcon, like you just can't have, you put certain people together, it's gonna happen. It can't help
yeah.
it. You know?
And you and Derek were still with the Allman Brothers, right? So it was just like when you guys were not touring with the Allman Brothers.
Yeah, there was an overlap there. There was and the Allman Brothers had scaled down and we're only doing probably about 20 dates a year, like
Right.
Denny does. When you get to that, when you get in your 70s, you don't want to do 60, 100 dates a year anymore. And so that was for me personally. I really was hoping that we would do like 20 dates with the Allman Brothers and 20 with Tedeschi Trucks Band, and then stay home the rest of the time, and like actually have a family life. Because I was like done with clubs and the drinking and the blah blah blah. I was like, wow, I don't want to be on the road all the time. And I was at that point, we were still trying to get pregnant, me and my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And that ended up being why I was leaving, because I was like, just like, this is, I can't even catch her ovulations, you know. I'm not even gonna be able to make this kid being on the road, you know. It was a big risk. A lot of people thought I was insane because the Allman Brothers was ending and everybody knew it. And I just was like, I don't know how I'm gonna do it, but I got to figure out. I'll never forget. I got this fortune cookie. It said, "Your best investment is in yourself," and I taped it with a piece of Scotch tape to one of my Grammys because I had to remind myself, like, you have to take these risks. You've taken them before. It's just the stakes are higher every time. And so when the Allman Brothers did end, I was kind of freaking out, but I was on my own and I was hustling. They ended when Jess was 6 months pregnant. And exactly a year later, I got the Dead and Company gig.
It's amazing.
So, Nigel was 4 months old, and we were flying out to California to do rehearsals, and I was like, "Thank you, God, thank you, universe, for rewarding me taking this insane risk." And I ended up playing bigger places, making way more money than I ever made. And it was like I was the opposite of what it's just like what Colonel Bruce said, like what your perception of yourself is this, and the potential for what you really are is limitless. So I took that risk again, and then bam, and now it's like I have people literally, I'm driving down the street and people in the car next to me like, I'm like,
Yeah,
"Oh, that
totally.
didn't happen with the Allman Brothers, you know? I mean, it's just like the universe will never cease to surprise you, or God, or however you look at it. I'm comfortable with God and mystical stuff. So I know the universe has my back, but you have to trust. You
Absolutely.
got to take that risk, and it's some kind of universal law that um, makes it matter. It makes it matter when you put your eggs in that basket or when you roll those dice, because that's I'm rolling the dice for my son, my wife, now a daughter that I adopted. It's so, but I still roll them. You know, because I know your best investment is in yourself.
I love all that, Oteil. And I think that's just all. It's just so true. I mean, it speaks to who you are, man. You gotta. And what you were saying earlier, like if you're not like when you were talking to I guess your future in-laws, if you're not in the game, you're not going anywhere. You got to be in the game to get to the next level. You have to believe in yourself. You have to take risks like you did, and every risk you've taken has paid off because you're open to the universe. And because you're obviously you are who you are, and you're always working. You're always honing your craft and learning new material and doing whatever you need to do. But you're open to do that. I just a few things I gotta ask you about, man. Before I let you go, I know I'm keeping you here for a long time, and I apologize.
Oh man, we do podcasts for like I listen to like 3 hour podcasts. I'm fine. I don't have anything going today, really.
Awesome. I love that because I could talk to you forever. But so Joe Russo, the drummer, he was
Yeah.
playing with Phil Lesh and Bob Weir on a gig, and he said he had one earpiece listening to Phil was talking to him, and he had another earpiece with what Bobby was telling him, and Phil is like, speed up, speed up, speed up, speed up, and Bobby's like, slow down, slow down, slow down, slow down, and he's basically just looking at them both and nodding. But you had a similar story when you were with the Allman Brothers, and like Dickie Betts is like, "Let's go!" He wanted to take the jams to like this crazy elevated, abstract place, and Greg Allman was like, "Just fucking play the beat, man. Let's just stay 4/4. Let's just play it straight." Can you share a little bit of that story?
Well, this is a great lesson that I think people have to learn, and it's about creative tension. I mean, it happens in Dead and Company. You can't get and these are democratic situations. It's not like Greg Allman and Friends, which he had his band, and that's how he did it. He's like, why do we always have to have long jams? In his band, they didn't have the long jams. He was like, can we keep this to 16 bars? I'm like, why are you asking me? It's the Allman Brothers. That's what you guys are famous for. So you would have one guy telling you one thing, other guy telling you the exact opposite. And you're just like, what do I do here? And it's a great lesson in creative tension because, without that tension, you don't have, like, I think of it in terms of sex. Like, an orgasm is creative tension. Without the tension, there's not the orgasm. And then after that, you have a new life created. right? So you take the tension away. There's no sex. There's not even sex, much less an orgasm. So there's no life. So you have to accept that, the yin yang symbol, the Tao, all that stuff. So, God and the devil, you know what I mean? Like it's, you can't, you can't have one without the other. That's the universal law. One defines the other, so I accept it now because without it, you have nothing.
Right.
Right. And it's
Right.
funny because these
Right.
guys are almost like cursed to be with each other because if they go out separately, it doesn't happen the same and everybody knows and that's why not as many people come to see it. But then when that thing you get that all that tension back together, everybody's like it's so funny. You cannot escape it. So you have to be able to hopefully you could I think bands could do therapy. I think younger bands are doing that right now. You deal with that in marriage. You deal with that with your kids. Like I love my kids, but I want to kill them sometimes. Like, what are you doing? Jeez, ugh. You're
I
trying to
feel that.
you're trying to make me mad at you. I mean, they're doing it on purpose. But then
Yeah.
they'll do something else, and you're just like your love for them is so much bigger than all that. But you have to live with that. It's harder than
Right.
anything you could ever. All the cliches are so friggin' true, man. So much harder than you can. People just can't imagine how you describe being sleep deprived for like 4 years.
Right.
Like I can't. Maybe some prisoners of war no way, like it's another thing. But you just have to accept it. That's our human condition and learn from whatever we're supposed to learn from that particular situation, even if you have to get out of it. Like at some points, it could become diminishing returns or
Destructive to
yeah,
us.
destructive to you. Yeah, and then you got to be.
So I think there was one particular situation where this whole thing came to a head. I think you guys were playing like Elizabeth Reed or something like that, and like the jam went on like forever, and then I think at like the end of the gig, like Greg Allman came out and said, which one of you guys is listening to Fish or something like that, right?
Oh,
Was it?
the Mountain Jam where I see that's what happened was after Dickie left, um, they called Jimmy Herring,
Oh,
and it was really hard for Jimmy too because I'm glad he ended up going with Phil Lesh because Jerry had passed away. So we were replacing someone that passed away. You know, there might be this, but it's not like to the level that it is when that person's still alive, like Dickie Betts. And so there would literally be people that would come that would normally stand in front of Dickie and in front of where Jimmy was and turn their backs to the stage in
yeah.
protest. So that
Wow.
shit was brutal, man. Well,
Yeah.
anyway, Derek had played with Colonel Bruce in the Aquarium Rescue. He had sat in with us a bunch of time, and Bruce was out. We go way out, do our Sun Ra thing, just um, and Dwayne loved that. Dwayne and Dickie loved the Colonel, and they loved all his weird shit. And Dwayne is the one that got him his first record deal on Capricorn Records,
Oh,
which
no way.
is what the Allman Brothers were on. But Phil Walden sold that to Columbia Records, sold it to Clive Davis, and so it came out on Columbia. But Dwayne's the one that did that, right? So um, we start going out, man, on stage, like during Mountain Jam, because Mountain Jam was one of those long. It's just a jam. It's not really a song. Like it was a Donovan song, but it was just a jam, a vehicle to like go do something you didn't do before.
Yeah.
And in the old days, it used to go out like that, like way out there sometimes, and just like the Dead did. And
Yeah.
so, we're on the bus reminiscing about the Colonel. Me, Derek, and Jimmy are all riding together. So Mountain Jam comes and we just go out there, man. And Greg did not like that shit, man. We got back on the bus and he would always go to the back of the bus. The older guys would take the back lounge. He had a bedroom set up in there. And he comes up, he goes, "All right, who's the Fish fan?" And we're like, no. And so I was like, "Oh, he's talking about Mountain Jam." And I was like, "Oh, Greg, you talking about Mountain Jam?" He goes, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. What y'all doing there?" I said, "Well, that really comes more from like Sun Ra or Colonel Bruce, than Fish." But yeah, sorry. He goes, "Well, whatever. it was. Please don't ever do that again. And so then he goes back in the back lounge. Now, me and Derek are laughing because, I'm like, it's not that bad. He'll get away, whatever. But Jimmy is mortified. He's crushed. He's like, oh my God, this is hero. And I just totally pissed him. It said, don't ever do that again. That's like the last thing you want to hear from your hero. So we're like trying to console him. He's like, oh man. We're like, dude, it's fine. It's okay. Like, don't sweat. So Greg comes back out later. I don't know how much longer, maybe 30 minutes or something, whatever. He goes, you know what, man? I'm sorry. He goes, this is your band too. He goes, I don't understand that shit, but Dwayne used to love that shit too, man. He used to do that same shit. So, whatever. Y'all, it's y'all's band too. If you really are feeling that, he goes back in the lounge, and I was like, wow.
That's amazing.
What a beautiful moment. And Jimmy's like super relieved.
Wow.
We're like, see, man, it's cool, but I was really, really, really surprised and pleased. It was an amazing moment.
That is an amazing moment,
Yeah.
man. So let's fast forward a little bit now to like present day stuff. So tell me. So I've been to a bunch of Dead & Co shows, all amazing. I went to the first one at Citi Field. I've been to everyone at Citi Field, actually. I've been seeing you guys at the Garden. Incredible band. It's just incredible. And it's so great for me as someone who's been to so many Dead shows and not having seen a Dead show since 1995. I was actually in San Francisco in 1995 when Jerry had passed away, actually, just serendipitously, which was crazy. But so it was great to be able to see, like a Dead band actually playing again. When you get that call, so you get that call. You were like you said, you'd heard the Dead songs and stuff, but you didn't know the tunes really. It's nothing you really ever did. You get that call, and it's like a mega band at this point. It's like okay, so obviously the existing members of Grateful Dead, like most successful touring band in the history of the world. Played more shows and made more money touring than they're like bigger than the fucking Rolling Stones. In terms of their tour money revenue. And then like John Mayer, who's like just a rock and roll, he's a fucking rock star. He's like a huge fit. So how does that work? Like who calls you? Who says, hey, Oteil, we need a bass player. We're putting this project together. Like how does that all work?
That particular call came from Matt Bush, who is like Bob's personal road manager. And he also like makes the set list and stuff. He's a super like Dead historian, really. And so I got a call from Bert Holman, who's the Allman Brothers manager, who we knew Matt Bush from when he used to work with Government Mule. So I've known Matt for many years. And he goes, hey man, Bush has called me wanting your number, said Bob Weir wants it. I was like, really? I was like, all right, because Grateful Dead 50 was coming up. So it's a big deal, like you're just hearing all this talk about Grateful Dead, everything. It's like huge resurgence, And I was like, sweet.
Field shows, right? The Soldier Field shows?
Yes, before Grateful, but it started in Santa Clara and then they did Chicago, right? And so I'm like, well, maybe they're talking about going on, So then I hear the rumors. Yeah, they're talking to John Mayer and they're talking about going on after Grateful Dead 50 and Phil retires from the band. And I was like, oh, please, yes, please. I got a 4-month-old, please. I've been hustling my ass off. Talk about the grind, dude. I was doing, just remind me in case I lose my train of thought. I was in that year period, I was doing all these super jams. So and New Orleans Jazz Fest was the king because I'd be there for like 10 days and I'd have 13 gigs. So I'd learn a set list for someone that was like 20 songs, go play that, not play it anymore, go to another gig that I had learned 20 songs for it, put that behind me, go to a third gig, same night, starts at like 3 a.m. Right, so I'm learning all these songs, man. It was like sucking on a fire hydrant, and it was perfect because it prepared me for learning all these Grateful Dead tunes. It's It's
Yeah.
great. So I talk about a grind. Oh, I was fucking grinding it. But I had a 4 month old. So I get this call and they're like, yeah, we're doing this thing and we want you to come out and play. There's other bass players being looked at, but you're like literally in the top two. So I was like, great. I didn't know who the other ones were. So me and my wife are like, yeah, come on, let's do this. And then we go down to New Orleans at next Jazz Fest, and we see that all these pictures with Mike Gordon came out with Mayer and Bob and Bill and Mickey and Chimenti at TRI. And so now the word is on the street. Mike Gordon's the bass player for the new band with Mayer. And my wife is just, I see all the blood draining out of her face. I'm like, honey, I'm sorry, but Fish bigger than the Allman Brothers. And it's just, that's how it goes, and Mike knew all the dead tunes. I didn't know all that stuff. Again, I don't have.
He's got like a style also,
He has
with,
Phil's exact rig replicated. He's worked with, it's just, I was like, honey, I'm sorry. I said, but, I told her this thing, it's like one of these laws of the universe, and she's seen it happen a number of times with me. I said, if that gig is meant for me, nothing can stop it. And I don't want anything bad to happen to Mike, but I know if it's meant for me, nothing can stop it. And if it's not meant for me, we don't want it. So it may look like the worst thing happened, and years later it'll be like, that's why I wasn't supposed to get. Thank you for closing that door, right? So we went on about that Jazz Fest. Oh man, we were so let down. Damn, we were so let down. But we roll on 2 months later or so, or however much later, I get a call from Matt Bush again. Says, you're up. I was like, what do you mean I'm up? He said, Mike can't commit. They want him to commit these chunks of time. And between Fish and his solo band, he can't commit. And he's not willing to like sacrifice his solo band or any time with Fish to do it. And I was just like, now this is the second or third time with my wife. I was like, see, honey, if it's meant for me, nothing can stop it. So then we got that gig, and Bill flew us out to Santa Clara to that first show that they had. And we hadn't been away from Nigel ever at that point. And my wife was too nervous to stay for the second night. She was like, I can't be that
so
far
you played
away.
the gig without rehearsing with a band?
No, I went to see Griffo this before we ever did a rehearsal.
Okay, gotcha.
And Bill flew me out there just to see it. And the funny thing was, me and my wife were I have the pictures. God, I can almost cry. We were standing there looking at, because we'd never played places this big with the Allman Brothers. And I mean, it's just like enormous.
That's
The
crazy.
amount of people and the energy, a Dead show, man. It's a Grateful Dead fit, too. The energy was like off the scale. And I was like, I still didn't have the gig yet, but I'm like up. They wanted me to come out and play with them. Like, we got to see, does it work first, right?
So that you played with them then when you went out there? That was like to
It
kind
was afterwards. It was afterwards. They just Bill.
So you just went to look at the venue?
Yeah, Bill just wanted to fly me out and catch the vibe. Like, welcome to the fit. Like, this could be your life. If this all works, this will be your life. So I was like, Jess, can you picture this for us? And she's like, I'm trying to, man, but I seriously can't. I was like, I can't either. Like, it literally has exceeded, even though I'm looking at it, I'm like, I can't. This is what Colonel Bruce was talking about, man.
Yeah.
What you think is here.
Yeah.
And what may be meant for you is past what you can conceive of. And now I'm looking at it, being told this is most likely going to be your life, and I still can't believe it. And neither can my wife. And she's been all around with the Allman Brothers. She's been to the Grammys with me, and now I'm a 2-time Grammy winner. She's seen on it. She's just still like, I don't know, man. This is crazy. And then I never forget, we were at Citi Field or somewhere, and I'm sitting there with her, and I'm like, look, now this feels like home. Isn't this weird? Remember that day and the rainbow came out? Remember?
I was at that show, man. Yeah.
I just was like, beyond fairy tale.
Yeah,
That's Colonel Bruce. Beyond fairy tale.
yeah,
That's when you know, and that's what life has for you. I mean, when you see your kid's head pop out, come on, man. I'm like, everybody should know you get miracles here. You get them.
yeah.
Don't let nobody tell you don't get them. You get
You're
them.
right.
Look in the mirror. How does all this work? This design. It's miraculous.
It
Consciousness
is,
or
man.
that we love and have a conscience. Like, what's that? That I could feel bad about something? Like, why does it matter? Like, so many things, I don't know, man.
So, I want to kind of dive into the logistics of how all this shit goes down, though, if you don't mind me just like picking your brain and
Sure.
So, so tell me about like the first time you jammed like with the Dead. Like, what how does that work? Like, okay, hey, we're gonna play these three songs, just learn them, and then we're gonna see how it works. So, like, how does that all go down?
Here's what I did. They gave me Mayor's number. So
Did
I literally,
you guys like were you guys friends before? Do you guys know each other at all?
oh no, we knew people in common. Like I have a dear friend, David Ryan Harris, that plays with him. And then the drummer in TTB, JJ Johnson, had played with Mayor before, but I had never met him and had no interaction with him. And so I called him or texted or whatever, and it's such a big catalog, excuse me, that I just put Dead CDs on or YouTubes of shows, and then when I liked a song, I would just write it down. And so I just learned all my favorite songs, and then I just kept going till I got up to about 50 songs, and 40 or 50, I think. And so I texted Mir and I was like, well, let's at least put together which ones I want to learn, which ones that I don't know, so that when we get there, at least we could say, both of us could say, oh, well, we both know this one, or we both know this one, that one. And we had learned a lot of the same ones in common.
Mm-hmm.
And then
So was he auditioning too at that point? Was he auditioning also, or was he
oh
already?
no, he's been a partner in it from the beginning because he was playing a lot of these places that we started out playing by himself.
Okay.
So yeah, he had the gig. It was me that, so I was and there was another guy, really great bass player. I think his name is Robin Sylvester, a British cat that plays with Bob a lot. And they had him come in too. And Bob was like, the gig's basically yours, but we're playing with him too. Like, if you break your leg, we got to know we can get him in like immediately and the show will go. I'm like, sure, fine. And I'm sure if it didn't gel with me, then he probably would have got the gig. But they're like, don't freak out, whatever. So we come in and we me and John told them, hey, these are all the songs that both of us know. So that we could just start going down the list. So we just start doing it, picking out vocal harmonies. It's a very like Rubik's Cube kind of process. I was very like, it's so weird when you're filling someone else's shoes. Um, and they've played with this person for so long, you know, and you want to do it right, and you just know it can't be the same. But their whole thing is
Right.
like, we don't want it to be the same. It's not supposed to. Even if we do it with you every night, we want it to be different. So let go of that. And it's a very Colonel Bruce like. Fortunately, that and the Allman Brothers had that same thing. They're like, no, you know what the record is like when it's the verse and the chorus, he play it like the record. When it comes to the jam, you jam. But with the Dead, it's even more amorphous because Phil changes his parts in the verses and choruses of some songs over the decades. Like it morphs, and so it's. And I just like I can't play like him, and I don't know. I was like, I just don't know. I feel like I'm not always unsure. And Bob, he said to me, he goes, Oteil, just play it black. You're black, just play it black. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, shit, that I can do easily. Because, and then I started to realize how much black influence there is in their catalog. Like, tons. I would say almost most of it. Like if you
Yeah.
took all the black, and we did this over the when during the George Floyd process, we were like, if we actually to continue to do the actual survey or whatever, like take every black influence song out of the set list and see how many songs there are left. So I always say that I won people's asses over before I won their ears over, because in all those tunes, I just groove it as hard as I can. So people are just like, they're like, oh my God, this is great. And so it worked out, I think, for that reason.
That's amazing. It's funny. There's another Colonel Bruce line where Jared told me, he's like, they would be watching like some show, and Colonel Bruce would be like, all right, let's get out of here. And Jared's like, what are you talking about, man? What's going on here? He's like, too much head, not enough ass. Like, we
Yeah.
gotta go. You know. So is Bobby like, kind of like a Colonel Bruce type of guy? He seems like kind of like a Colonel Brucey type of guy. Sort of.
All those guys are very mystical in their own way because their whole
Yeah.
path was completely dependent upon the unknown. And I have seriously never met people so willing to take a completely insane chance. And the way they do it is like, oh, that sounds like a good. And you see them get like this, and they're like, big risk. Oh, it's like it's very childlike and beautiful. Not not childish at all. I mean, they know from years of like everything we've done has like it just that's our thing. If we don't take chances, it doesn't come up roses. That's how we make gold by not playing it safe. It's really
Yeah.
crazy, and they all have it to a certain extent. I think Jerry was probably the most like the Colonel, though. You know.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that because I was actually going to say this. It's about being open minded, and a lot of times, like when I'm working out or whatever, I like watch like whatever old Jerry stuff, and I came upon this interview with Jerry. It was like for Relics magazine or something like that, but for like from like the like late '80s or something like that, And he's being interviewed on video actually, which was pretty cool. And he talks a lot about like when they're doing like the acid tests and all that sort of stuff, like and they would play these gigs. And really the way he was such an articulate guy. First of all, when you would hear him speak, and like really, I'm obviously like a brilliant human, and he was able, kind of very, very much like the way Jared is so able to articulate things. Like he was able to just sort of articulate his thoughts in such a way that it was just so clear. Like it was just, you just understood. Okay, I get it now. And it was about that open mindedness, that willingness to take risks and put yourself in an uncomfortable situation, being comfortable being uncomfortable, and like because that's where the magic happens. Yeah, it might really suck 80% of the time, and
Yeah.
but there's like 20% of the time it's magical, and it really then once you've attained that, he talks about like acid was kind of like that. Once you've attained that and you've experienced that, it like opens up a whole new realm of life. Like, oh wow, life could really be like that. Like there's this whole nother layer to life, to the universe, and it's kind of like what you're describing here. Also the stuff you said with Colonel Bruce.
And it's a beautiful life lesson too, man. I mean, just outside of music, like it really can. And I love, man. When I, I read Bill's book. I've read Phil's book. I watched all these interviews. There's a documentary they did on Bob Weir. I watched all the Jerry interviews I could find. Like I really, and you got that sense. Like there's an attitude towards life that's openness and a curiosity and a humility that I just see a lot with Jerry that I saw with the Colonel too. They're different. They're really different guys, but it's just a attitude of being, a way of being that I see a lot of similarities in, and that goes for everybody in the band. Really, it really does.
You can see it just as a fan. You can really see it, and from year to year, it's just gotten like better and better. Like just the gel, everyone just gels so much more. There's two things, man, that I just want to touch on before I let you go. One is you had like it's such a beautiful comment in one of these interviews that I was reading, and it was about like you singing with the Dead. And I remember I was at a show. I think it was one of the Shea Stadium shows. And I think you sung Comes a Time. I can't remember.
Yeah.
I think that's what it was. And like the minute you like opened up your voice, like the crowd just went berserk, like crazy, like just like nuts. And you had this great line, like actually I wrote it down. You said the best days of your life are always ahead of you, not behind you.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just so revealing because a lot of folks would say, yeah, just like it goes back to that Colonel Bruce comment. Like it's all about there's endless potential, and you don't even know what your potential is. Like like you were never like a lead singer in a band. Like,
I
and
mean, even when I sung in my band, my old lead singer started drinking again, and so he had a bad problem with it, and I had to let him go. And I took over the singing. I was like, "You're a way better singer than I am, but I can sing this gig better than you right now because my voice doesn't burn out. Like I just
right,
make it to the end of the gig." So, but at that point, I didn't have inner ear monitors, so you're always trying to scream over the band, and I wasn't a singer, so I wasn't using the right singing technique. So you fast forward to Dead and Company, and I have these inner ear monitors because we're playing so soft. I need to like crank my bass up in my ear so I can hear it. And I realized I could hit much higher notes in tune than I could before from singing because they were giving me all these high parts. And I was like, wow, maybe I can sing better than I thought. And my old voice teacher that I got when I had to take over singing, she was like, "You have a beautiful voice." I was like, "God, I hate my voice. I just got to do this because we got all these gigs booked." She was like, "You really should not be so hard on yourself. And it's hard for me to listen to the older stuff. But then when I started singing with this band, I couldn't hear the audience in my ears because I didn't have the audience in my ears. I just had the band. So I got off stage and I was like, was that okay to ask my wife? I was like, is that okay? She was like, do you not hear the crowd? Like when you just walk up to the mic before you even open your mouth? And I was like, no. So I started getting the crowd in my ears. And I walk up to the mic and I was like, oh shit, now it's going to throw me off. I'm about to tear. I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. And of course, first thought is Colonel Bruce. Your conception of yourself is this big. If someone had told you that, oh, you're going to be singing lead at stadiums and,
crushing it.
with John Mayer on stage, no less, a guy that's made so much millions, like singing, like real singers, like, and I was like, I would have been like, whoever your dealer is, I want their number because I want whatever you're on. Um, and it just the more my life unfolds, everything that the Colonel told me just proves to be truer and truer and truer to that. And now I'm like, I don't know. Who knows? I may become a millionaire one day. I don't know. I might be a billionaire. I don't even know. I don't care about, that's not my aim in life, but I just know like I'm not limiting myself to anything. There's no ceiling. That's my only dogma in my life is no ceiling, and don't think your best days are behind you. You
I
know.
love that line, man. I love that line. I love that. I mean, I don't think there's a better place to close this interview, man. I mean, Oteil, this was amazing. I think there's just so many powerful lessons in this for all.
Thank you.
And you're just a beautiful human. It's just so obvious. And
I appreciate it. I'm trying to be. I was a really shitty human before, and I think that's the key with life is just that you're trying to get better. Like you don't have to be the best, but you at least got to be trying to get better. And I am trying. I have good reasons to now. So thank you. I appreciate it. I don't feel like a good person because I know all my past, but I refuse to be my past too.
that's
So we can't be limited. We can't like drag all that into now. We got to let it go and forgive ourselves you know, and try this thing anew. The sun comes up new every day. So
right, my man. Well, I'm leaving this interview quite inspired, man. It's
man, I'm glad. That's what I hope for more than anything, even more than music, man. Honestly, I really feel like this pandemic and our podcast that I'm doing, the Comes a Time podcast, a quick plug, um, and I think that really is like raising my children and being a good husband this time with my wife, and trying to communicate these things to people because I've buried people that didn't get this, and you only get some things later on in life. And I think it really is more important to me that I reach people with this stuff than the music. So thank you, because it really means a lot to me.
Well, you're doing it with both, my man. Thanks again, Oteil. I really love you, man.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you for listening to the Dr. Mudgil podcast. The audio for this podcast can be found on Apple's iTunes and SoundCloud. Let's get it.